Let's take a look at some of the video of the Boeing Dreamliner in the air shortly before taking off at 1:30 p.m. local time. The 787-8 soon stops climbing before it sinks out of view and crashes. A huge plume of smoke rising shortly after that takeoff in air for just a matter of seconds. Eyewitness video captured the crowds gathering at the crash site, crews combing through wreckage in a residential area. Among the victims, one Canadian. CBC News has learned that Dr. Nirali Patel was a dentist from Mississauga, Ontario. And the sole survivor from the crash has been identified as a British man. The flight took off from Ahmedabad, the largest city in the Indian state of Gujarat. The plane left the airport and climbed about 160 meters, according to the flight data available. 10 seconds after lifting from the ground, the plane began to lose altitude, then sank steadily for 5 seconds before crashing into the neighborhood of a medical school hostel. We're going to have continuing coverage over the next 2 hours on this Air India plane crash. Just ahead, we'll speak to an aviation expert to break down what we know, what we don't know, and what investigators may be zeroing in on. Plus, a family friend of the Canadian victim will join us. He'll tell us about the family and how the community is reacting. And later, we'll talk to a former member of Canada's aviation investigator, the Transportation Safety Board. That is all coming up. But let's begin our coverage with Sarah Galashan. She's here in our Vancouver studio tracking the latest on this crash. Sarah.
Yeah, Ian, as you say, is very early Friday morning. On the ground in India is waking up to a nightmare that unfolded around noon yesterday when this plane crashed shortly after takeoff. The airline, Air India, confirming the death of all but one of the people who were on board, that being 241 in total dead, 229 of them passengers, 12 of them crew members. Total number of victims on the ground is unknown. You're looking at the crash site right now, and that gives you an idea of the complications in terms of debris. We have been told at least 5 medical students were killed when this crash happened, as many as 50 more injured, and there's a great deal of fear that there may be those who are trapped beneath the debris. The plane, the 787 Dreamliner, crashed. It was a residential neighborhood. The point of impact, though, is described as a medical hostel where, in other words, traveling doctors could stay as they are practicing in nearby hospitals. This is happening in the city of Ahmedabad, a city of 5 million. It is also located in the home state of the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi, who has called this crash a heartbreaking beyond words. It was a flight that was bound for London's Gatwick Airport. And to that end, there were a number of British nationals on board. The UK Prime Minister has also offered condolences and shock and support for the investigation. And to that, we have additionally heard just in the last hour or so from the US Transportation Board and as well the FAA, both of them pledging support, these agencies, for that investigation, sending their members to India to offer support, and as well saying that any important information that is discovered early on will be shared early on. Take a listen to that.
I'd start with it's so preliminary, and we've seen the video on the dramatic video of the tragic crash. We have assembled a team, an expert team, to work with the NTSB and with the Indian authorities to investigate that. My point earlier was, as we proceed down this road with the investigation itself, if there's any information that becomes available to us regarding any risk, we will mitigate those risks immediately.
And Sarah, what more can you tell us about the investigation that is now underway?
Well, I mean, they have, a number of things to work with, a lot to work with if you consider that there are at least 2 recordings of this plane taking off, leveling, it would appear, and then that spectacular fireball that you have seen in the videos that have been circulating all day of this. And so certainly investigators will be looking at that. They will also, of course, look at the debris field. That debris field, incidentally, is spread across a couple hundred meters in a residential neighborhood. So that does present its own set of challenges. We're talking about streets. There are apartment buildings that have collapsed under the weight of this crash. But it is also potentially less complicated when it comes to things like trying to locate the voice recorder or the data recorder, given that you're not talking about a crash that involves any large body of water, which can definitely present some serious complications. And as well, I mentioned off the top, there is a survivor here. There's a lone survivor who was, there is video showing him able to walk after this had happened. He was taken to hospital, does have some injuries, but doctors have said he is certainly not dangerously injured. He is just being cared for in hospital right now. He is also speaking to officials. And so, you can imagine this. He may not even realize he has valuable information to share, but certainly investigators will be speaking to him about whatever account he can offer on what happened on board that plane.
Okay, Sarah, thank you, and we'll come back to you over the next 2 hours for more updates on this story. Let's take you now to some video of the aftermath of the plane crash. Here's a report from CNN News 18 on the ground in Ahmedabad.
This was a medical college. This was a hostel mess. And you can see right on the roof of the hostel mess, the tail end of the aircraft is still stuck. That is where the aircraft first crashed outside. This is not even, as the crow flies, it's not even half a mile. It might have taken, less than a minute and a half for the aircraft to reach here from the airport. There's also a first responder, somebody who operates the ambulance services. This is a medical college campus. I'll try and see if they can tell us, if you can tell us exactly what happened. What did you see?
Suddenly, we got a call at 1:41 minutes that something is crashed near our office, 200-300 meters away from our center hospital. Our supervisor and our team rushed to the scene, and they found that aeroplane is crashed. But we didn't identify that it is a passenger or someone other plane crashed. Then we found that it's the passenger plane.
And you rescued people from the hostel also, at least 25 people.
25 people rescued from the hostel.
Right, so that's an important point, because what we are talking about in terms of casualty is not just the crew members and the passengers of the aircraft, but also those who were undergraduate doctors inside this medical college. They were here to have their lunch, and I just want to quickly show you how far the debris have been flung apart. This is the second part of the plane, which is on the front side of the hostel building, and then just beyond that, perhaps you can see my video journalist zooming in on the remains of the luggage. That's all that remains of this air crash. All of these debris, just span that side. These are the debris outside the medical college hostel mess. And for the next half a kilometer or so, which is about 1/4 of a mile, this is all that you're seeing. Debris and parts of the Indian Airlines aircraft that crashed. And even as I'm speaking to you, maybe in the ambience you can hear, that's another aircraft which has taken off from the Ahmedabad airport. So the sound is quite loud because it's just outside the airport wall.
Extraordinary scene and some extraordinary reporting as well from CNN News 18 earlier in Ahmedabad. Let's bring in Johanna Wagstaff. If you're a regular viewer of our coverage on CBC News Network, you know that we often bring Johanna in to talk about aviation stories. And in this case, let's start with this brief and tragic flight.
It was brief. Flight 171 took off from runway 23 at 1:38 p.m. local time. I think we've got a picture of the airport to show you that it would have entered via the apron. And we have this information from what's called ADSB. That's automatic information that's sent from the plane to GPS. So we know that it entered at the apron. We don't necessarily know if it backtracked to the beginning of the runway, but either way, it would have had at least 1,900 meters or more of runway length. 30 seconds after takeoff, you can see the runway there. 30 seconds after takeoff, a mayday call was reported. A few seconds after that, maximum altitude was reached. Again, this is according to ADS-B data, 625 feet above sea level. Once corrected to the height of the airport, that brings it to about 400 feet, and that's consistent with what we're seeing in the video. A few seconds after that, the plane almost looks like it settles into the ground, that controlled descent right into crash. Again, just a few seconds later.
Let's talk about the weather conditions there at the time, and then after that, maybe some of the things that you, as someone who has a keen interest in aviation and a private pilot, some of the things you're watching for. But let's start with the weather conditions.
Yes, we know exactly what conditions were at the airport at the time. According to METAR data, 37 degrees Celsius, light winds, good visibility. Now, 37 degrees is hot, and aircraft don't perform as well in heat. The air is less dense, so there aren't as many air molecules to help create that lift. That's where flaps come into play. You can extend the back of the wing to create more surface area. This would have all been calculated ahead of time. The temperatures, the amount of fuel, we know we don't necessarily need a full fuel for a flight from India to England. The passengers, the weight, that would have all been calculated, put into a computer, triple checked, and the flap degree and the throttle setting would have been dialed in before that flight. But this is what's clear, Ian. The plane stopped climbing, and that's what investigators will be looking at. Was it a mechanical failure of both engines? Was it something to do with pilot input, something to do with that throttle and flap? Was it a fuel mixture? I also can't rule out a bird strike, a double bird strike that didn't show up on the video perhaps, or one engine and the debris went into the second. We're also looking at reports that what's called this air turbine might have dropped automatically, an indication, again, of this electronic hydraulic failure. We know it was an instantaneous engine failure, but not instantaneous loss of life. So this is what they'll be looking at over the next few days.
It's always nice having you on stories like this and having your analysis, and you'll come back in the second hour, Johanna.
I will.
Yeah, thank you very much. And some of the things that Joe talked about, we'll also be discussing with Mark Miller, an aviation expert, who will be with us in just a few moments. This is a look at what it's like to land at this airport. This is the airport where the crash happened. And this footage was taken by one of our reporters, Evan Dyer, back in 2018. This was on a flight that the Prime Minister was on, and Evan decided to take some footage in the cockpit, as you can see. And just interesting to be watching what is happening here from this airport. Interesting perspective. Okay, let's bring in Mark Miller. I just mentioned him a moment ago, an aviation journalist. Also, I didn't realize this. You're a former air traffic controller?
No, I'm not.
Okay, I saw that, and I thought I know you've done a lot of stuff. I didn't know you'd done that. Okay,
That'd be one too many careers.
but you certainly have a lot of experience as a private pilot.
Yeah.
Yeah. So let's talk about what has caught your eye so far when it comes to this crash.
Well, I was in my car driving here, and some of these highlighted videos of this rat being deployed, or appears to be deployed. It hangs down on sort of the co-pilot side, just forward of the wing.
Let me just jump in. So RAT stands for?
I think it's ram air turbine.
Right.
I could be correct.
No, but just in terms of somebody hears, what this term is. So this is something.
It's like a little windmill that drops down, and you spin that. And we all know that a big windmill will produce electricity. Well, that happens if you have an electricity or a hydraulic failure in the airplane. It deploys automatically into the slipstream. But normally this would only happen at altitude. I've never heard of a rat deploying right after takeoff.
Okay, so let's back up for a moment. So normally a pilot would never deploy this turbine in any situation.
That's it there.
Okay. Much less, seconds after taking off. So if that is in fact this device.
And it might not be. I mean, this could be an artifact.
What do you mean by an artifact?
Maybe it's some digital noise. I mean, the video's not great.
Right.
If the video was great, we could tell for sure if we have flaps deployed.
Okay, so let's go step by step on this. So if that turbine, in fact, has been deployed, if that's what it is, that would tell you that the pilots needed to have power for the electrical system.
That's right.
Yeah.
That something has happened in the airplane to its power systems. A double bird strike. Johanna mentioned that. We saw that happen with the Korean crash, I think just before Christmas. But we don't see any fire coming out of those engines. Normally, if you have a bird strike, you would see stuff coming out. Also, it's 37 degrees. It's 2 in the afternoon. What bird is out flying when it's that hot?
And also we don't see, I mean, it would be a flock of birds,
Yeah.
presumably, for both engines to be incapacitated, and you're fairly close to the ground, so you'd think that some of this video would show that. Okay, so this is something that investigators will likely be looking at. We've also heard a lot about flaps, so explain that to us.
Okay, so flaps basically change the shape of the wing of the airplane and create more lift. We always need flaps in these big airliners to get off the ground, especially on a hot day like this where it's 37 degrees Celsius.
And maybe we can watch the video as you're talking from the airport where we've already seen this once, but let's look at it again of the jet taking off. So more about flaps.
And in this video, I think we see some flaps. But what's interesting here, at this point, normally you would see the gear go up. If they've had an electrical failure, it's possible there's not enough power. This is an aerodynamic stall now. The airplane, you see it sort of rolling from side to side. It's settling. It's no longer flying. The angle of attack is such that the wing has stalled. It's no longer creating lift, and that's why the airplane starts to sink into the ground. So the question also is, why did the pilot not push the nose over to try to reduce that angle of attack and try to fly away? He's climbing, and now he's not. So why does the climb stop? Is it a problem with power in the engines? Is it the auto throttles rolling back? Is there a problem with fuel? Has somebody turned off the fuel to the engines? We don't know. These are all things that investigators will want to look at.
And so before you take off, the pilots go through a checklist, and one of the things on that checklist is setting the flaps to the appropriate angle for the takeoff. So how could it be that if flaps are the issue here, that so soon after takeoff, the flaps may have contributed to the loss of climbing altitude?
Perhaps somebody retracted the flaps. Perhaps the flaps weren't set properly. That has happened in the past. Another theory is they had a single engine failure, so one engine failed, and they reduced power on the wrong engine, which is a procedure you do, but you want to always confirm you're killing the power to the correct engine. But all those things would have happened so quickly. The thing that sort of sticks out in my mind, why is the gear not going up, and why does it appear that there's a rat being deployed? That is very mysterious.
So we have video from various angles
and you'll get
this
more.
doomed flight.
And you're going to get more from all the security cameras. We're going to hear the audio. Is that airplane producing power, and do we hear it?
Well, so I was going to say we have eyewitnesses, we have a survivor, but we also have black boxes which appear to be in a place that has survived this crash.
In fact, that last story that you just showed of the
woman going around,
you actually saw, she walked around, the camera panned down, and that's the aft bulkhead. That's the pressure bulkhead, and just behind that is where the black boxes are mounted. They might even still be mounted to the airframe. So hopefully they're in really good shape. They weren't burned, because there's nothing burned after the bulkhead. So there'll be all the data we need will be on there.
Okay, Mark, thank you very much for coming in. We're going to check back with you a few times, both this hour and next hour, as we go through what happened here and what investigators may be focusing on. Thank you very much.
All right, Ian.
We'll be back with more as we learn more about the victims of this devastating tragedy, including the one Canadian on board. We'll speak with a friend of the family next, and he'll tell us how the community is reacting. We are live here on CBC News Network. It is just before 5 a.m. in Ahmedabad, India. Emergency crews are working through the night at the scene of the country's worst airline crash in decades. An Air India jet bound for London, England, crashed Thursday afternoon local time shortly after takeoff, killing all but one of the passengers on board, and among those who died, a Canadian. CBC News has confirmed the identity of that Canadian, Dr. Nirali Patel, a dentist from Mississauga. She leaves behind a husband and a young child. The news hits close to home for our next guest. Don Patel is a family friend of Nirali Patel and a community leader, and he joins us from Toronto. And thank you for joining us at what must be a very difficult time. How did you first learn about this crash?
Well, early morning, I got a call from a friend of mine who is a common with both families around 6:30, looking for some advice or guidance that what should we do in these scenarios, how we can have the confirmation that it was Nirali indeed on the plane. Yes, the list came out or the news came out, but they wanted to confirm that, yes, indeed, the Nirali was on that plane boarded, as even though they know that it will take months and days probably to identify the actual persons there. That's how the call came in, and that's how I got the news to start with.
Yeah, and tell me a little bit about her.
Well, I didn't meet Nirali in person after a while, but being in the community and being involved into the Gujarati community, Ahmedabad is hour and 15 minutes from my town where I live. It's one of the busiest airports in the state of Gujarat. Lots of Gujarati community people has a connection with that Manchester of Gujarat. So this is how we all were connected, and I got to connect with her brother and the parents who is living in Brampton-Caledon border. And as we speak right now, they already boarded on the plane via Emirates to fly to India this afternoon. So husband, their 2-year-old son, her brother, and father and mother all are on their way to India. And we know that how shocking it will be for them to see what has happened back home.
And for you, knowing this area, this city, this airport, what's it been like for you during the day, besides the loss of somebody who you have contact with through the community? But as you've watched the footage from back home, how have you been reacting?
Well, it is definitely one of the most congested city in state of Gujarat, very vibrant, very energetic, which is a business hub, and nobody would have imagined that the plane would take off and not even go a little further and will dive down. Most of the footage, people first thought that it was crashed at the time of landing, but then after the news came in, also there was the news came in, their ex-CM, meaning ex-premier of that state, was also in that flight flying to London, UK to meet his daughter. So more shocking news came out that just the recent chief minister of that state was also in that plane. Then we heard about the only one Canadian was on board, and then realized that after the list came out that it was Dr. Nirali Patel, who lives with her husband in Etobicoke. So that's how we got connected. And it was devastating for the family, for the community, for the people, friends, whoever had known them. Very sweet girl. Nobody has thought that it would have been happen with her or anybody else on that complete flight.
All right, Don Patel, again, thank you very much for speaking with us and giving us a kind of a personal connection to the Canadian victim, Nirali Patel. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, and so let's bring Sarah Galashan back in. We heard a little bit about the one Canadian on board, but tell us about some of the other victims of this crash.
Well, the total number, the death toll here is still really unknown, and it has actually fluctuated throughout the day. At one point, it was quite high, estimated to be 294 deaths here, but that within a few hours actually was lowered to somewhere closer to around 240. The reason for this is, while we know that all but one on board board that plane were killed in this crash. It's unknown as to how many on the ground were killed. Certainly, we understand at least 5 were killed, but as many as 50 others on the ground suffering an extent of injuries. And so we continue to watch that and may not know for some time, depending on those injuries, just how many were killed because of this crash. But on board, as I say, 241 died. Among them, and you just heard this from the gentleman that we were just interviewing there, that among them, there was a former chief minister of the state. Vijay Rupani was his name. He was the chief minister, in other words, sort of a premier of that state of Gujarat between 2016 to 2021. And so, Ian, among the headlines right now that you're seeing on the ground is the death of this very well-known political figure.
So this plane was headed to London Gatwick. Many of the people on board, 53, I think, are British citizens. So this is a disaster which is hitting that country very hard.
Yeah, to the point, 53 of them, a special hotline actually has been put in place so that relatives who need to arrange visas very quickly in order to get to India, in order to just be there in some cases, that they can do so, and as well that they can get information from that hotline as well. There are stories of those UK citizens that we are starting to hear. Among them is Jamie and Fiongal Greenlaw Meek. This is a couple. Here they are. They had just, hours before getting on board this flight, posted to Instagram about a trip of a lifetime. Back in the UK, they run a wellness center, and they felt that they had had such an incredible experience traveling in India that they, upon return, were going to start a vlog to let everybody know about that trip. And they truly, and were expressing a real sense of calm because of their time spent in India. As well, BBC and local media in the UK reporting about the death of the Nanabawa family, a couple, 2 parents, and as well, this is the other couple, but this is the, Javed Alid Syed family, a young couple, and their 2 children also on board. So, Ian, as I say, this is the Nanabawa family, the parents and their young daughter. These are heartbreaking stories, and we're starting to learn more about who was on board that plane.
Yeah, all right, Sarah, thank you very much. So figuring out why this Air India jet crashed will be the focus for teams of investigators, including some international groups that are making their way to the crash site right now. More on what those experts will be looking for is next. We're live here on CBC News Network.
he's fine. I said nothing else. Yeah, at least the family is happy that he's okay, but we're still upset about the brother.
That is a family member of the sole survivor of today's Air India crash. They're still waiting for news on the survivor's brother, who's not been heard from since the crash. 241 of 242 people died when the plane went down in a crowded part of Ahmedabad, a city of more than 5 million people. Among the dead, people on the ground. The jet crashed onto a medical college hostel during the lunch hour. This is the first time a Boeing 787 Dreamliner has been involved in a fatal crash after more than a decade in service. International investigators, including the U.S. Federal Aviation Administration, are making their way to the region to help. Well, our next guest has an aviation career that spans over 4 decades and has been involved in investigations. Kathy Fox is a former chair of the Transportation Safety Board of Canada. Thank you very much for joining us. What was your initial reaction this morning when you heard about the crash?
Well, I was absolutely horrified to see the aftermath of the crash. It's a very tragic situation, and my heart goes out to those who've been directly affected, families and loved ones of those who've lost their lives either on the airplane or on the ground.
Take us inside the process of the investigation. Who is likely going to be involved, and how does that unfold?
Well, I'll speak generally. When there is an accident, the state, that is the country where the accident occurred, will usually lead the investigation. However, other countries may participate. So, for example, the state or the country that designed and manufactured the aircraft, the state or the country where the aircraft was registered, and the operator of the aircraft. They have a right under international standards and best practices to participate in the investigation. And then countries that have an interest because they had nationals who were on board who were either deceased or seriously injured may also participate, but to a much lesser degree. They have what's called, they can appoint what's called an expert to the investigation.
There are crashes sometimes that happen in the deepest parts of an ocean or deep into the jungle. In this case, you have a crash that happened close to an airport in a major city. There is video, and there likely will be, as Mark Miller pointed out earlier in the hour, more video to come from security cameras, for example. One survivor, eyewitnesses. As investigations go, it feels to me, but let me ask you, there's going to be a lot of evidence here for investigators to work with.
Well, hopefully. I think the most critical pieces of evidence that investigators would look at in a crash like this would be the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder. The flight data recorder on a modern aircraft like the 787 registers thousands of parameters that can tell investigators what the aircraft was doing, any issues with any engines, airframe, or major components on board. And of course, the cockpit voice recorder records not only the voices of the crew, but also any alarms that may have been going off in the during the time of the accident. So I believe, I don't know that they've been found yet, but assuming they will be found at some point, and they're quite resistant to fire and water, that will give investigators a lot of information, along with the air traffic control tapes, the radar, and of course the video that you referenced.
Yeah, and as we heard earlier in the hour, where those flight data recorders would be are in a part of the fuselage which appears to be relatively intact. So that is a good sign in, tragic circumstances, of course. As a former investigator, is there anything that you have seen today in terms of video or heard today that stands out to you?
Well, first of all, I wasn't an investigator per se, but I reviewed hundreds of investigation reports and oversaw a number of investigations as a board member, as a chair. But I think it's really important for everybody. I know everybody wants to know what happened as soon as possible. I think it's really important to let the investigators do their job. The investigators will approach this with an open mind. They'll look at all the evidence available to them to try and determine what happened and why it happened and what needs to change so that nothing like this happens again.
Do you have any sense of how much experience and maybe even credibility the lead investigators here will have, the Indian investigators, in a case like this, particularly when they're dealing with their country's flagship carrier, Air India?
Well, again, accident investigations are typically conducted by agencies that have independence from the regulators. And in an accident such as this, there's going to be a significant involvement from other countries, particularly the United States, since the aircraft was designed and manufactured in the U.S. So I'm confident that there'll be a lot of collaboration, and whatever assistance that the country leading the investigation may require would be provided to them should they reach out beyond the United States, for example.
All right. Thank you very much for this. Kathy Fox, former chair of the Transportation Safety Board of Canada. Well, let's bring Mark Miller back into the conversation, an aviation journalist. And you just heard from a former chair of the Transportation Safety Board of Canada. Maybe you can speak a bit more freely than she can. How much confidence do you have in this investigation that will be led by the Indian authorities?
Yeah, well, the NTSB will be involved because the airplane was manufactured in the United States. So that's part of the international agreement and the rules. So always the country manufacturer gets to have their investigators involved. So the NTSB will be there. I mean, this is kind of new ground, Ian, because we've never lost a 787 before. This is the first of these new composite, double aisle airplanes. There was the A350 crash in Japan, which we figured out what happened there, but that was a collision on the ground. That's like somebody running a stop sign. This is different. The one thing that's interesting here for investigators that'll make their job maybe a bit easier is that this is a low energy crash. The airplane's not going that fast, so they have lots of the pieces of the airplane still intact.
Boeing has gone through a really rough time over the last few years, particularly because of the 737 MAX 8, right? Which is not what this aircraft is. And as you point out, this aircraft, which has been in service, the model, for more than a decade, I think, has not had a single major crash, no fatal crash, no crash where the plane was destroyed. How much concern do you have about the safety of this plane?
Yeah, none, because I think it was introduced in 2011. There are millions of hours flown on this airplane. Millions of people have flown in this airplane. So I have 100% confidence in this airplane. I would get on it right now. We will find out what happened, and whatever it was fast, it was catastrophic, and clearly they didn't recover.
We're going to talk more with you over the next hour and a half about something we talked about earlier in this hour, which is if you were investigating this, and as a journalist, where you would kind of be focusing your information. So we'll talk to you in a little bit.
Okay.
Mark Miller, thank you very much. Well, coming up, we'll take you to the ground in Ahmedabad, India, the morning after the deadly plane crash. Our CBC reporter is there with the latest next on CBC News Network. It is coming up to 5:15 a.m. in Ahmedabad, India. People waking up to the aftermath of the deadly Air India crash. And let's take you to that city right now. The CBC's Salima Shivji is with us. And Salima, what's the mood like there in this early morning?
Well, Ian, it's been a long night for so many family members and friends of the victims of this deadly crash. As we see the death toll mounting, the official death toll, but many of the family members here already know that their loved ones are gone. And basically, I'm outside the hospital, which is very close to the crash site, and there's so many stories of grieving here already. Many family members have been here for hours. They've stayed here overnight. Some are, sleeping at the side and crying because they do know that their loved ones are gone. Either they were passengers on the flight or people in the path of the plane as it crashed down into that heavily, densely populated area and sort of left a trail of destruction in its wake. I spoke with one family member, a brother who lost his younger brother, a 15-year-old, and he was just inconsolable, crying, kind of covering his face with his hands. Basically, he told me that his younger brother was hit by the door of the plane that just came flying away from the wreckage as it tore apart when it landed onto this area very close to Ahmedabad's airport. And his brother is sadly gone. His mother is in a hospital here with burns all over her body. And that is just one story that I'm hearing here. I've also been speaking to doctors actually working at the post-mortem ward just behind me here at this hospital. And some of them have been shipped in from rural areas a little bit further away in Gujarat, in this state, to help because there are just so many bodies that need taking care of, that need identifying. I'll let you listen to what one doctor told me.
There are way too many bodies, like we are not even able to count it, and they are beyond identifiable. They are completely burned, and the only way they are identified is by using their teeth. It's horrible. That's the only way I can describe. There are no other words to describe what's going on there.
So at a loss for words there in terms of describing what it's like inside. She only took a very short break and then went back in because she knows that the families are counting on her as they wait for official confirmation, that their loved ones' remains have been identified in this terrible crash. We're also hearing from people here on the ground. It is very, very early in the morning here, but that Prime Minister Narendra Modi might be coming here tomorrow to offer his condolences to people in the area, eyewitnesses who saw the crash as well, who are also traumatized as rescue efforts continue. There's heavy machinery being used to sort of try to clear that debris and recover as many bodies as possible.
Yeah, obviously the family members will be the most traumatized by this, but you make an interesting point about how many others are going to be affected, including that doctor you talked to, right? It's really telling to you can already see the toll on her, and we're still in the early hours of what she described in your clip as a horrible situation. Salima, are you hearing anything about the next steps in this investigation?
Well, the main priority is still, of course, the recovery operation. Like I mentioned, there's heavy machinery being used in the crash site, on the crash site, but the crash site is quite wide, and the recovery efforts are complicated, of course, because this is such a heavily, densely populated area. There are a lot of people in the area, a lot of debris, and unstable buildings that were kind of nicked as the plane was coming down. That's the recovery part of things, but of course there is an investigation. It's already begun. It will be led by India's Aircraft Aviation Investigation Bureau, and Indian officials have promised it will be full and thorough. Boeing has said it will send a team to support India in that investigation as it goes on and do whatever is necessary to get to the bottom of what happened here. The United States is also sending investigators from the Transportation Safety Board to assist local authorities. But getting answers is going to be really quite difficult. Obviously, as I mentioned, the rescue efforts is complicated. The scene of the crash is extremely complicated as investigators will have to pick through what happened, pick through not just the debris, the path of the plane, but also any sort of recordings, why there was a mayday call and then all communication was stopped from the plane. So a lot of unanswered questions for investigators as families here just start their grieving process.
Salima, one last question. I am curious about kind of those first moments when you arrived in the city and kind of how it felt, what you saw, just what it was like there through your eyes as you arrived.
Well, it's a very somber scene. People are, feeling the weight of this. Like you mentioned, the toll of an accident like this. It is, of course, one of the worst airplane crashes that India has seen in decades, since the 90s. And the fact that it happened so close to the airport, you hear planes above you constantly here, and it is quite jarring to hear them when you think about what happened just, yesterday here, but earlier today for you. People are kind of feeling that. I felt it as soon as I entered the city. We went towards the crash area, but it is quite cordoned off because the Prime Minister is expected to arrive sometime this morning, a little bit later. It is a heavy feeling as you enter this crash site area, and especially on the grounds of this hospital area. With so many people, family members, they're switching off with other family members, just trying to be here to get any sort of official confirmation. It's soothing for them in a way to kind of be beside this hospital area, even as it's so difficult as they start that grieving process. So that's sort of the sense I felt as soon as I landed here in Ahmedabad.
I always appreciate your reporting, Salima. Thank you very much for speaking with us.
My pleasure.
Still ahead, we'll have continuing coverage of the plane crash and bring you more details about that sole survivor. That's next here on CBC News Network. Air India has confirmed that one passenger survived this plane crash. In fact, he was seen walking away from the wreckage. That man now in hospital where he met with officials, and doctors described him as disoriented with multiple injuries, but in stable condition. According to a medic, the survivor said that he found himself next to the debris from the wreckage. He then walked to an ambulance that took him to hospital. His brother talked to reporters earlier in England.
Yeah, obviously it feels great and doing well. Fine, I guess. He's just more worried about the other brother. Just utter shock, that's all. Speechless. Honestly, he himself has no idea like how he survived, how he got out of the plane. Well, when he called us, he was just more worried about my other brother, like, just find OJ, find OJ. That's all he cares about at the moment.
So that man who survived was flying home with another brother when the plane crashed, and the whereabouts of that other brother still has not been confirmed. Okay, let's bring in Mark Miller again, an aviation journalist. You're going to have kind of more time in the next hour to talk a little bit about some of the things that are developing. I saw you poring over a computer screen a moment ago, so give us a sense of what we're going to be talking about next hour.
Well, there's an enormous amount of footage of the wreckage and the material. We're finding some very interesting things in that footage that we're going to be able to share in the next half hour or so. And there's lots of information. More video is emerging every hour as, you know, this gets fed up into the internet. And yeah, we're just trying to piece together. We see the landing gear embedded in the building. This is the pressure bulkhead I was talking about earlier. This in behind this sort of dome is where the black boxes would be mounted. And the other piece of that, we see that embedded about 3 stories up in the building, and we see the landing gear in there as well. So,
and those black boxes are robust and are designed to withstand high temperatures, but also quite a
there
shock,
it is there.
right?
Look right here. There's the landing gear.
Yeah.
And just interesting enough, just behind the landing gear is that rat, that ram air turbine we're talking about. It's very possible that just outside that frame, we're going to see the rat.
Yeah. And so let's quickly have about 90 seconds, and we have more time to talk next hour. But some of the kind of leading theories or things investigators would look at, one would be if that turbine, if that indeed is the turbine that pilots would use because they need electrical power.
Yeah, they've had a catastrophic failure of some kind.
If indeed that's what that is.
If that is a rat. It seems to be in the right place.
Yep.
We've looked at some comparative pictures from Boeing of the rat deployed during flight testing. It's in the right place.
What would lead to a modern jetliner losing electrical power, if indeed that's what happened, so soon after takeoff?
Unprecedented. Never heard of it. I mean, the only thing I can think of that could cause that is a double engine failure. But we just don't see the birds. We don't see the things that would cause that. Did they have a fuel starvation issue with the engines that caused them to shut down? I mean,
but sometimes, fuel starvation issues, it can be a fuel line frozen, but not in a city where it's 39 degrees Celsius.
No. In fact, if you remember the British Airways 777 coming into land after leaving China over the North Pole, both engines failed because they got clogged ice in one of the filters.
Yeah, so lots of mysteries here. But as I say, you have some video to show us shortly after the top of the next hour. Mark, it's among many people we're talking to on the program. Really nice to have you to talk about these things. So still to come, we will have much more in our continuing coverage of the Air India crash. And next hour, we'll speak to another aviation expert, this one in India. And from that perspective, he'll tell us what he expects to see in this investigation. Stay with us. You're watching CBC News Network.